The christening reception was supposed to be quiet. A baby wrapped in white linen. Soft music in the church hall. Family gathered beneath stained glass windows. Then Vincent Whitlock stood up. He did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. He lifted his glass, looked at his wife across the room, and said calmly, "The baby isn't mine." The words landed in the silence like something sharp. 30 people heard it. His mother heard it. The priest heard it. Selena Whitlock didn't argue. She didn't cry. She simply looked at Vincent for a long moment, and then down at the child in her arms. What Vincent didn't know yet was the DNA test he demanded would prove he was the father. And it would also uncover a secret his own family had buried for nearly 4 decades. If you're listening to this story right now, take a moment before we begin. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what your local time is. Stories like this travel far, and it's always powerful to see how many people are listening together. And if you believe that truth deserves patience, and that dignity sometimes speaks in silence, consider subscribing so you don't miss what comes next, because Selena Whitlock didn't fight that accusation in the church hall. She waited. And sometimes, the quietest response becomes the one no one can escape. Before the accusation, before the whispers in the church hall, and the silence that followed Vincent Whitlock's words, Selena Whitlock had believed her life was ordinary in the way many stable American lives appear from the outside. Structured, predictable, and built slowly over years of careful choices. She was 33 when her daughter was born. Long before that, Selena had built a career that suited her temperament. She worked as an archival researcher at the Fairfield University Library, a job that required patience more than charisma. Most days were spent in climate-controlled rooms where old documents were cataloged, scanned, and preserved. Birth records, court transcripts, university correspondence from decades past, paper Selena often thought had a way of remembering the truth long after people tried to forget it. It was the kind of work many people would find tedious. Selena found it comforting. The quiet suited her. The order of files, the logic of, records, the simple dignity of facts that did not change depending on who told the story. Her colleagues described her the same way: calm, reliable, observant. She did not speak often in meetings, but when she did, people tended to listen. At home, her life seemed equally structured. 7 years earlier, she had married Vincent Whitlock. Vincent was 38 now, a financial advisor at a respected investment firm in Stamford. His work revolved around portfolios, retirement plans, and the language of calculated risk. Clients trusted him easily. He dressed well, spoke carefully, and carried himself with the steady confidence that comes from numbers always lining up the way they should. When Selena met him, that confidence had felt reassuring. He was organized in ways she admired. She was thoughtful in ways he appreciated. For the first few years, their marriage looked stable, even to those who watched closely. They bought a modest colonial house on a quiet street in Fairfield County. The backyard had a narrow stone path and a maple tree that turned a deep red every October. Their routines formed gradually: coffee together in the morning, dinner most nights. At the kitchen table, quiet weekends spent walking through local parks or visiting Vincent's mother. That was Margaret Whitlock. Margaret lived only 15 minutes away in a larger house that Vincent's father had purchased decades earlier, when the Whitlock name carried even more weight in the community. She was a composed woman in her early 60s, always dressed carefully, always speaking with the practiced calm of someone who had spent a lifetime protecting appearances. Margaret valued reputation, not loudly but consistently. The Whitlock family, she liked to say, had always conducted itself with dignity. Selena understood early in the marriage that Margaret expected the same. For years, there were no real conflicts, only small adjustments that most marriages quietly absorb. But something changed when Selena became pregnant. The pregnancy itself had not been planned with precise timing, but it was not unwelcome either. They had spoken about children before, always in a practical tone someday, when things were settled, when work schedules were manageable. When Selena told Vincent she was pregnant, he had smiled. He hugged her. But even then, something in his expression lingered a second too long before settling into excitement. At the time, Selena assumed it was simply surprise. Pregnancy moved forward slowly. The first trimester left her exhausted, the second easier, the third filled with the usual physical discomforts doctors warned about. During those months, Vincent began changing in ways that were subtle enough to ignore if someone wanted to. Selena noticed because noticing things had always been her nature. It started with questions. Small ones at first. Questions about dates. How far along did the doctor say you are again? When exactly did we find out? Sometimes he asked casually, almost as if he were making conversation. Other times the questions came late at night, after long silences. Selena answered patiently. She assumed he was nervous about becoming a father. But the questions returned again and again, always circling the same idea certainty. Once, while standing in the kitchen, Vincent leaned against the counter and said something that stayed with her longer than the others. "You know," he said lightly, "timelines can get confusing for people sometimes." Selena looked up from the cutting board. "What do you mean, nothing?" he said quickly. "Just something someone mentioned at work." He smiled then, as if the conversation were already finished. But Selena felt something shift in the room. Not accusation, not yet. Something quieter. Like a thought Vincent was testing out loud before deciding whether it deserved to exist. As the pregnancy continued, Vincent began spending more time away from home. His firm, he explained, had taken on several new clients. The market was unstable. People needed reassurance. Late evenings became common. Phone calls happened behind closed doors. Sometimes Selena would wake in the middle of the night and find Vincent sitting in the living room with his laptop open, the glow of the screen lighting his face, while the rest of the house remained dark. When she asked if everything was all right, he always said yes. Just work. Selena accepted the explanation. But acceptance did not stop her from observing. It was during this period that she began carrying a small notebook in her bag again. It was not unusual for her. Archival researchers often kept field notes, dates, document references, reminders. At first, the notebook contained simple entries. Doctor appointments, ultrasound results. Things she might want to remember later. But gradually other notes appeared. Short phrases. Dates beside comments Vincent had made. The time he asked again about the pregnancy timeline. The evening he canceled dinner with her to meet a client whose name he never mentioned again. Selena did not write these things because she believed something terrible was happening. She wrote them because writing things down had always helped her think clearly. Margaret Whitlock's behavior also changed during those months. At first, the visits increased. She brought small gifts, blankets, baby clothes, books about raising children. But the warmth of those gestures carried a certain distance. Margaret often studied Selena while they spoke the way a person might examine a painting to determine whether it was authentic. Once, while sitting together in the living room, Margaret placed her teacup carefully on the table and said something that sounded almost sympathetic. "Pregnancy can be confusing," she said. Selena looked at her. In what way? Margaret smiled politely. "Oh, women go through emotional shifts. Sometimes memories blur. People say things they don't fully think through." Selena did not understand the remark at the time, but she wrote it in the notebook later that evening. Not because it was important yet, only because something about it felt unfinished. By the time Selena entered her final month of pregnancy, the distance between her and Vincent had become measurable. He slept more often in the guest room. He avoided conversations about the baby's name. And sometimes, when he thought she wasn't looking, he watched her with an expression she could not quite interpret. Not anger, not sadness, suspicion. The baby arrived on a rainy afternoon in early spring. A daughter, healthy, small, perfectly quiet, except for the thin cry that filled the delivery room. Vincent stood beside the hospital bed as the nurse placed the child in Selena's arms. For a moment, he looked like the man Selena had married, relieved, amazed. Then the moment passed. He kissed Selena's forehead, congratulated her softly, and stepped back. Later that night, while Selena slept in the hospital room, Vincent stood alone near the window, looking out at the parking lot lights. Even then, before the christening, before the accusation that would echo through the church hall, a thought had already taken root in his mind. And once certain thoughts begin growing, they rarely remain quiet for long. Selena, meanwhile, slept with the baby beside her, and the small notebook resting inside her bag. She did not yet know how important those pages would become. But somewhere in the quiet order of written facts, the beginning of the truth was already taking shape. The house on Hawthorne Lane had always been quiet. It was the kind of quiet people associated with comfort, soft footsteps on hardwood floors, the hum of the refrigerator late at night, the distant sound of wind brushing through the maple tree in the backyard. But after the baby arrived, the quiet changed. It no longer felt peaceful. It felt watchful. Selena noticed it first during the second week after they brought their daughter home from the hospital. The baby slept often, waking only to feed or cry softly in the early hours before dawn. The pediatrician had said they were lucky. Some newborns are far more restless, he had told them with a smile. Vincent nodded politely in the office, but he barely spoke during the appointment. At home, the silence between them grew heavier with each passing day. Vincent returned to work only 4 days after the birth. That by itself was not unusual. His firm had important clients, and financial advisors rarely stepped away from the markets for long. But something about the way he left that first morning stayed with Selena. He stood near the front door, adjusting his tie, while she sat on the couch with the baby wrapped against her shoulder. "Call me if you need anything," he said. Selena nodded. "I will." He hesitated for a moment, looking at the baby as if trying to decide whether to reach out. Instead, he picked up his briefcase. The door closed quietly behind him. From that day forward, Vincent's distance became easier to measure. He held the baby only when someone else was present. During the evenings, he often remained in his study upstairs with the door closed, claiming he needed to review investment reports or respond to clients in different time zones. Sometimes he stayed there long after midnight. Selena did not interrupt him. Instead, she developed a new routine. When the baby slept, Selena moved slowly through the house, doing small tasks, washing bottles, folding blankets, organizing the kitchen. It was during these quiet hours that she began noticing things. The first was Vincent's phone. He had always been careful with it. Most professionals were. But now, the phone rarely left his pocket. When he did place it on a table, the screen always faced downward. Once, while Vincent showered upstairs, the phone buzzed against the kitchen counter. Selena glanced at it without touching. The notification appeared briefly before the screen dimmed again. Unknown number. Message preview disabled. That detail alone meant little. But it joined other small observations in her mind. Later that evening, she opened her notebook. She wrote the date. Then she wrote a single line. Phone notifications hidden, increasing. The notebook itself was nothing special, just a small, hardcover journal she had once used for work notes. The habit of writing things down came naturally to her. In the archives, every fact mattered only when placed beside other facts. One detail alone was rarely meaningful, but patterns, once they appeared, were difficult to ignore. 3 nights later, Selena woke to the sound of footsteps downstairs. The baby slept quietly beside her, the monitor casting a soft green glow across the bedroom wall. Selena checked the clock. 1:42 a.m. Vincent was not in bed. She moved carefully out of the room and stood at the top of the staircase. The living room lights were on. Vincent sat at the dining table with his laptop open and his phone pressed to his ear. His voice was low, but the quiet house carried sound easily. "I told you," he said. "Not until we know for certain." A pause. Selena could not hear the other voice. Vincent leaned forward, rubbing his forehead. No, I'm not rushing anything. Another pause. Then his tone sharpened, because if this goes wrong, it affects everything. Selena stepped back before the floorboard beneath her feet could creak. She returned to the bedroom without making a sound. The next morning, Vincent acted as if nothing unusual had happened. He drank his coffee quickly while checking emails and left for work before Selena finished feeding the baby. That evening, she wrote another note. Late call, 1:42 a.m.? Not until we know for certain. The notebook began filling faster after that. Phone calls, unusual bank notifications. Vincent deleting messages moments after reading them. None of it proved anything, but it created weight. Margaret Whitlock's visits also became more frequent. She arrived unannounced most afternoons, always dressed in impeccably tailored coats, soft perfume, the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to entering any room as if she belonged there. Margaret held the baby carefully, studying the child's face with a level of concentration that made Selena uneasy. She's very quiet, Margaret said one afternoon. She sleeps a lot, Selena replied. Margaret nodded. Babies reveal themselves in time. The comment sounded harmless enough. But Margaret watched Selena closely as she said it, almost as if waiting for a reaction. During another visit, Margaret stood near the window while Selena folded laundry. You know, Margaret said the early months after childbirth can be overwhelming. Selena looked up. They can be. Women sometimes feel disoriented. Selena waited. Margaret's voice remained gentle. They misremember events, dates, conversations. The words hung in the room longer than necessary. Selena finished folding the blanket in her hands. I keep good records, she said quietly. Margaret smiled. Yes, she said. I imagine you do. That evening, Selena added another entry to the notebook. Margaret repeated reference to memory confusion. The entries were not accusations. They were observations. Selena did not confront Vincent. She did not question Margaret. Instead, she did what she had always done when faced with incomplete information. She collected data. One afternoon, while checking the household mail, Selena noticed a bank envelope addressed to Vincent. Normally, he handled all financial correspondence. But the envelope had been mixed with other mail and already opened slightly at the corner. Inside was a statement she had never seen before. The account number did not match any of their joint accounts. The balance transfer listed on the page was significant. $5,000. Recipient name partially visible beneath the fold of the paper. Selena did not remove the statement from the envelope. Instead, she used her phone to take a quick photograph. Then she returned the paper exactly as she had found it. That night, she reviewed the image carefully. The recipient name read Langley Medical Consulting. The name meant nothing to her, but it did not look like an investment firm. She wrote it in the notebook, Langley Medical Consulting Payment. Over the next week, Selena quietly reviewed their shared financial portal. Vincent handled most investments separately through his firm accounts, but some transfers still passed through their joint household system. She found 2 more entries linked to the same name. Different amounts, different dates, always listed as consulting services. None of it explained why a financial advisor would pay a medical consulting company. Selena closed the laptop and sat quietly at the kitchen table while the baby slept upstairs. Outside, the maple tree branches shifted gently in the wind. Across the room, Vincent's briefcase rested beside the hallway chair. He would return home soon. Selena looked at the notebook lying open before her. The pages now contained dozens of small observations. Dates, words, names. Individually, they meant little. But together, they formed something larger, something approaching a pattern. And somewhere within that pattern was the reason Vincent Whitlock had begun looking at his wife the way he did. Not with anger, not with disappointment, but with suspicion that seemed to exist long before the baby had ever been born. Selena closed the notebook slowly. In the archives, she often reminded younger assistants of a simple rule. Truth rarely appears in a single document. It reveals itself across many pages, and sometimes the person assembling those pages does not yet realize the story they are building. Selena Whitlock did not yet know that the pattern she was recording would soon explode into public humiliation, or that the accusation Vincent would make in a crowded church hall had already begun forming quietly inside this house. But the evidence of it was already here, written carefully, line by line, waiting. The morning of the christening arrived with a clear sky and the quiet, polished order that always surrounded events at St. Matthew's Episcopal Church. The stone building stood at the edge of Fairfield's older district, its tall windows casting colored light across the narrow lawn. Families from the congregation had gathered there for generations, for weddings, baptisms, funerals, and the small ceremonies that quietly stitched a community together. Inside the reception hall behind the sanctuary, long tables had been arranged with white linens and simple flowers. Someone had set out trays of pastries and small sandwiches. Coffee brewed in the corner, filling the room with a warm, familiar smell. Selena Whitlock arrived carrying her daughter in a pale blanket embroidered with tiny silver threads. The baby's christening gown, an old family piece from Vincent's side, fell softly over her small legs. The gown had belonged to Vincent as an infant. Margaret Whitlock had insisted on it. "Tradition matters," she had said when she delivered the carefully preserved garment 2 weeks earlier. "Our family has always honored these things." Selena had thanked her and said nothing more. Now, as people entered the hall and offered congratulations, Margaret moved through the room with practiced ease. She greeted guests by name, introduced distant relatives to colleagues from Vincent's firm, and made sure everyone had a drink in their hands. Margaret understood gatherings like this. Public moments mattered. Appearances mattered. Across the room, Vincent Whitlock stood near a cluster of co-workers from his investment office. He wore a charcoal suit and a light blue tie, his posture straight, his expression composed. Anyone watching casually would see nothing unusual. But Selena had learned to read smaller details. Vincent's smile appeared half a second too late in conversations. His eyes drifted toward her, more often than necessary. Once, while someone spoke to him, his gaze moved briefly to the baby in Selena's arms, and then away again. It was not affection. It was calculation. Selena noticed. She simply held her daughter a little closer. The ceremony itself passed quietly inside the sanctuary. The priest spoke gently about new life and community responsibility. A small bowl of water reflected the colored light from the stained glass windows above. When the baby's forehead touched the water, the congregation murmured softly in approval. Selena felt the small warmth of her daughter's breath against her wrist. For a moment, the outside world seemed distant. Vincent stood beside her during the ceremony, answering the priestess' questions in the calm voice expected of a father. He did not hesitate. He did not falter. Only Selena noticed how carefully he avoided looking directly at the child. Afterward, everyone returned to the reception hall. Glasses were filled. Chairs shifted across the floor. Someone turned on soft music near the back of the room. Guests gathered around Selena, offering polite smiles and gentle questions. "She's beautiful. She has your eyes. How are you adjusting to motherhood?" Selena answered quietly. She thanked them. She accepted their kindness. But she also noticed something else moving through the room. A subtle tension. Margaret kept glancing toward Vincent. Vincent kept checking the time on his watch. At first, Selena assumed it was nothing. Perhaps Vincent simply wanted the event to end quickly. But as the minutes passed, the feeling sharpened. Lydia Harper arrived just after noon. She moved through the crowd quickly until she reached Selena's side. Lydia had been Selena's friend for nearly a decade, ever since they met at a local bookshop where Lydia once worked during law school. She leaned close and whispered, "How are you holding up?" Selena gave a small smile. "I'm fine." Lydia studied her face for a moment. "You don't look fine." Selena adjusted the baby's blanket. "I'm observant." Lydia followed her gaze across the room. Vincent was speaking with Margaret near the refreshments table. Their conversation appeared brief but intense. Margaret's expression remained composed. Vincent's shoulders were tense. "What's going on with him?" Lydia asked quietly. "I don't know yet," Selena said. The word yet passed between them like a quiet agreement. Before Lydia could ask more, Vincent lifted his glass. He tapped a small spoon against it. The clear ringing sound cut through the room. Conversations faded. Guests turned toward him. Vincent Whitlock stepped forward, positioning himself near the center of the reception hall. Selena watched him carefully. Something in his posture had shifted. The polite smile was gone. His expression now carried the calm detachment of someone about to present information rather than celebrate an event. "Thank you all for coming today," Vincent began. His voice was steady, measured. This day is supposed to be about family and honesty. The word honesty lingered in the air. A few people exchanged uncertain glances. Vincent continued. "I believe in clarity," he said, "especially when it comes to important matters." Selena felt Lydia stiffen beside her. Vincent's eyes moved slowly across the room until they settled on Selena. He raised the glass slightly in her direction. "I think it's only fair," he said calmly, "that we address something before this celebration continues." The room had grown completely quiet. Margaret stood near the table with her hands folded neatly in front of her. She did not interrupt. Vincent's gaze remained fixed on his wife. "The baby," he said, "is not mine." The words arrived without emotion. They did not sound like anger. They sounded like a statement he had rehearsed. For a second, no one moved. A fork dropped somewhere onto a plate. The priest standing near the doorway looked startled. Selena felt every pair of eyes in the room turn toward her. Some faces showed confusion, others already held suspicion. Vincent continued speaking before anyone else could. "I think the responsible thing," he said, "is to conduct a DNA test immediately." He placed the glass down on the table beside him. "I'm sure Selena understands that this is necessary." The calm certainty in his voice made the accusation feel even heavier. Selena did not answer immediately. Her daughter shifted slightly in her arms, making a soft sound. The small movement drew several people's attention back to the baby. Selena looked down at the child. Then she raised her eyes to Vincent. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Vincent waited, perhaps expecting anger, perhaps expecting denial. Instead, Selena adjusted the baby's blanket carefully. Her voice, when it came, was quiet enough that only the closest guests heard it clearly. "If that's what you want," she said. Vincent blinked once. The response had not been what he expected. Someone near the back of the room whispered to a friend. Another guest cleared his throat awkwardly. Margaret stepped forward slightly, her expression still composed. "Vincent," she said gently, "perhaps this conversation," but Vincent shook his head. "No," he said. "It should happen openly." Selena studied him for another moment. She saw something now that had not been visible before. Not certainty, not confidence, fear. Then she shifted the baby higher against her shoulder. Without raising her voice, without arguing, Selena turned toward the door. Lydia followed her immediately. No one tried to stop them. The crowd parted instinctively, unsure whether to speak. Selena walked slowly through the reception hall, past the tables, past the flowers, past the guests who avoided her eyes. Behind her, the room remained silent. Vincent Whitlock stood where he had made his announcement, Margaret beside him, the priest watching with quiet discomfort. Outside, the air felt cooler. Selena stepped onto the stone path leading away from the church. Lydia reached the parking area with her. "Selena," Lydia said softly, "are you okay?" Selena opened the car door and carefully placed the baby in the back seat. She closed the door gently. Then she looked back at the church building. The stained glass windows glowed faintly in the afternoon light. Inside, the reception was likely dissolving into uneasy conversations. "He wanted a public moment," Selena said. Lydia nodded slowly. "Yes." Selena turned the key in the ignition. Her voice remained calm. "That's fine." Lydia watched her. What are you going to do? Selena pulled the small notebook from her bag and set it on the passenger seat. I'm going to keep records, she said. The car rolled slowly out of the parking lot. Behind them, inside St. Matthew's Episcopal Church. Vincent Whitlock had just begun a story he believed he controlled. Selena Whitlock already understood something he did not. Stories built on accusations can collapse very quickly when the facts begin appearing. And Selena had spent her entire life learning how to find facts. The first formal letter arrived 3 days after the christening. It came in a clean white envelope addressed to Selena Whitlock, printed in careful legal font. The return address belonged to a Stamford law office Selena had never heard of before. She recognized the pattern immediately. Professional, measured, designed to appear reasonable. Selena sat at the kitchen table while the baby slept upstairs in the bassinet. Morning sunlight filtered through the window above the sink, reflecting softly off the polished wood surface. She opened the envelope with the same calm precision she used when handling fragile documents at the university archives. Inside was a short letter. Vincent Whitlock, it explained, was requesting a court-admissible paternity test in order to resolve uncertainty regarding biological parentage. The language avoided accusations. But the meaning was clear. Vincent had decided to make the public humiliation official. Selena finished reading the letter once. Then she read it again. Not because the words were confusing, because she wanted to see exactly how the accusation had been constructed. Legal language often revealed as much through its structure as through its claims. This letter had been written carefully. There were no emotional statements, no direct allegations of infidelity. Only the suggestion that clarity was required for the sake of responsibility. Selena folded the letter neatly and placed it on the table beside her notebook. Upstairs, the baby stirred briefly and then returned to sleep. Selena waited for the house to become quiet again. Then she opened the notebook and wrote the date. Letter from Vincent's attorney. Formal DNA request. She paused for a moment before adding another line. Language neutral. Strategy controlled. Across town, Vincent Whitlock likely believed this letter would force Selena into a defensive position. Many people, when publicly accused of betrayal, reacted emotionally. They denied. They argued. They demanded apologies. But Selena had spent too many years working with records to respond that way. Evidence mattered more than emotion. And evidence had a way of unfolding slowly. She reached for her phone and dialed Lydia Harper. Lydia answered on the second ring. Tell me you didn't get something from a lawyer already, Lydia said without greeting. I did. A pause. DNA request, yes. Lydia sighed. That was fast. Selena glanced at the letter again. He wants it formal? Of course he does, Lydia replied. Public accusation, first legal paperwork second. It makes him look responsible instead of reckless. Selena listened quietly. That's a strategy, Lydia continued. If the test came back the way he expects, he could frame everything as justified concern. And if it doesn't, Selena asked. Another pause. Then he'll need a different narrative. Selena leaned back in the chair. I'm going to agree to it. Lydia hesitated. You're sure? Yes. You realize he probably thinks you'll resist. Selena looked toward the staircase where her daughter slept. I won't. Lydia's voice softened. You're calmer than I expected. Selena turned the notebook page. Facts resolve faster when people stop arguing with them. Later that afternoon, Lydia drove to the house. She arrived carrying a laptop and a folder filled with legal reference material. Although Lydia worked primarily as a paralegal in a civil litigation firm, she had spent enough time around family law cases to understand how accusations like Vincent's were often used. The two women sat at the kitchen table while the baby slept nearby in a portable bassinet. Lydia reviewed the letter carefully. He's trying to look reasonable, she said finally. That's obvious, Selena replied. What's not obvious, Lydia continued, is why he chose such a public moment to accuse you. Selena did not answer immediately. Instead, she reached for another envelope lying near the counter. "This came last week," she said. Lydia opened it. Inside was the photographed bank statement Selena had discovered earlier, Langley Medical Consulting. Lydia read slowly. "You've seen payments to them before, yes? How many? 3 so far?" Lydia frowned. "That's not typical for an investment advisor." "No." They sat in silence for a moment. "Do you think it's medical?" Lydia asked. Selena shook her head slightly. "I don't know yet." Lydia closed the folder. "Here's the part that bothers me," she said. "If Vincent believed the baby wasn't his, he could have asked for a DNA test privately." "Yes, he didn't." "No, he chose a room full of witnesses." Selena nodded slowly. "That means the accusation itself was part of the strategy." Lydia looked toward the bassinet, where the baby slept peacefully. "What kind of strategy involves humiliating your wife in front of 30 people?" Selena closed the notebook. "One that requires public credibility," she said quietly. That evening, Vincent returned home earlier than usual. The tension between them was noticeable even in the way the front door closed. He placed his briefcase on the hallway table and walked into the kitchen, where Selena sat with the baby. For several seconds, he simply watched them. "You got the letter," he said. Selena nodded. "Yes." Vincent waited. He seemed prepared for anger, for confrontation. But Selena's calm unsettled him. "Well," he asked, "I'll take the test." Vincent blinked. "You will, yes?" He crossed his arms slowly. "That was easier than I expected." Selena looked at him steadily. "If clarity is what you want." Vincent studied her face. For the first time since the christening, uncertainty flickered across his expression. "You understand," he said, "that if the results confirm what I believe, there will be consequences." Selena adjusted the baby's blanket. "I understand that results confirm facts." Vincent looked away, briefly irritated by her tone. "I've already arranged the laboratory," he said. "They'll contact you tomorrow." Selena nodded again. "That's fine." Vincent hesitated near the kitchen doorway. Then he said something almost offensively. "I'm doing this because I deserve the truth." Selena watched him carefully. "You might get more than you expect." The words hung quietly between them. Vincent frowned. "What does that mean?" Selena lifted the baby gently and stood. "It means DNA tests don't only answer the question people ask." Vincent opened his mouth to respond. But Selena had already walked past him toward the staircase. That night, after feeding the baby and placing her carefully in the bassinet, Selena returned to the kitchen. The house was quiet again. Vincent remained upstairs in his study. Selena opened the laptop Lydia had left behind. Together, earlier that afternoon, they had reviewed several financial records linked to their joint accounts. Most were routine: mortgage payments, utilities, groceries. But 3 transfers stood out clearly, all directed to Langley Medical Consulting. Each transfer occurred within the last 6 months, each one authorized by Vincent personally. Selena opened the search engine and typed the name carefully. The results were limited. No active clinic, no current office listing. But one archived record appeared in an old professional directory. Dr. Howard Langley, former hospital administrator, retired 20 years earlier. Selena leaned closer to the screen. The listing mentioned something else: consultant, medical record mediation. Selena closed the laptop slowly. Her notebook lay open beside her. She wrote another entry: Langley Hospital Records Consultant. Then she added one final line: possible connection to birth documentation. Upstairs, Vincent Whitlock believed the DNA test would soon prove Selena Whitlock had betrayed him. But Selena had already begun noticing something Vincent had overlooked: the payments, the medical records, the quiet references to certainty. And somewhere inside those details was a truth far older than their marriage, one Vincent might not be prepared to face. The laboratory scheduled the DNA appointment for the following Thursday. The message arrived in Selena's email early in the morning, short, professional, and precise. The test would take place at a certified medical lab in Stamford, one commonly used in family court cases. Both parents and the infant were required to appear. Identification documents would be verified. Samples would be collected under supervision. Results, the message explained, would take approximately 10 business days. Selena read the email once, then forwarded it to Lydia Harper. And to the attorney Lydia had recommended, Daniel Brooks. Daniel Brooks was not dramatic in the way television lawyers often appeared. He was a middle-aged family law attorney whose reputation came from being careful rather than aggressive. His office overlooked a quiet street 2 blocks from the county courthouse, and his clients often described him with a single word: measured. When Selena met him 2 days later, he listened more than he spoke. His office shelves held neatly labeled case files. A framed law degree hung behind his desk beside a photograph of 2 teenage sons standing on a fishing pier. Selena sat across from him with the baby asleep in a stroller beside her chair. Daniel read Vincent's letter slowly. Then he folded it and placed it back on the desk. Legally speaking, he said, his request is straightforward. I assumed it would be, Selena replied. Daniel nodded. DNA tests resolve paternity disputes quickly. Courts prefer them to arguments. Selena studied him carefully. You don't sound surprised. I'm not. Daniel leaned back slightly. What interests me, he continued, is the way the request was delivered. The church, Selena said. Yes. He tapped the letter once with his finger. A man who genuinely doubts paternity usually asks privately first. Selena said nothing. Daniel watched her for a moment. You didn't argue with him there, did you? No. That was wise. Selena shifted slightly in the chair. I didn't see a reason to. Daniel smiled faintly. Most people would have. Selena looked toward the stroller where her daughter slept peacefully. I prefer facts. Daniel nodded again. Good. Because facts are what we'll need. He opened a new file folder and wrote Selena's name across the tab. Tell me everything that has happened since your pregnancy began. Selena did not rush the explanation. She described Vincent's questions about timelines, his late-night phone calls, the changes in his behavior, Margaret Whitlock's repeated references to memory confusion, the payments she had discovered to Langley Medical Consulting. Daniel listened without interrupting. When she finished, he leaned forward. May I see the financial records? Selena handed him the printed copies Lydia had prepared. Daniel examined the pages carefully. 3 transfers, he said. Same recipient. Yes. Have you confirmed what Langley Medical Consulting does? Not exactly. Daniel looked thoughtful. Medical record mediation, he said slowly. That's an unusual service. Why? Because it usually involves disputes over documentation. Selena felt a small shift in the air between them. What kind of disputes? Daniel folded the paper again. Birth records, hospital paperwork, identity verification. Selena's voice remained steady. You think it's related? Daniel raised one hand slightly. I think it's a possibility. He leaned forward again. But we should be careful about assumptions. Selena nodded. Assumptions had never interested her anyway. Daniel closed the folder. For now, he said, the DNA test moves forward exactly as Vincent requested, and after that we watch what happens next. Later that afternoon, Selena returned home. The house felt quieter than usual. Vincent had not returned from work yet. The baby slept in the bassinet near the living room window, while Selena sat at the dining table, reviewing their financial records again. She was not searching for drama. She was searching for patterns. 3 payments to Langley, all within the past 6 months, all initiated by Vincent. She checked their joint tax portal, then their insurance statements. One entry caught her attention, a request for archived medical documentation submitted under Vincent's name. Date 2 months earlier. Selena leaned closer to the screen. The hospital listed in the request was not one she recognized. Hartford Memorial Medical Center. The request itself was vague. Historical record verification. Selena wrote the information in her notebook. Vincent hospital record request. Upstairs, the baby stirred briefly. Selena stood and carried her gently around the living room until the child settled again. As she placed her back in the bassinet, Selena felt a quiet certainty growing. Vincent had not suddenly begun doubting the baby's paternity. Something had happened before that. Something that made him begin asking questions about timelines and medical records. That evening, Vincent arrived home unusually tense. He placed his briefcase down and immediately walked into the kitchen where Selena stood preparing a bottle. "The lab confirmed Thursday," he said. "Yes, you'll bring the baby." "Of course." Vincent leaned against the counter. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Then he said quietly, "You're very calm about all this." Selena capped the bottle and turned toward him. "Should I be shouting? That's not what I meant." Vincent studied her face again, searching for something he could not find. "Most people would defend themselves," he said. Selena held the bottle carefully. "I'm defending myself. How? By agreeing to the test." Vincent frowned slightly. "That's not a defense. That's compliance." Selena's voice remained level. "Sometimes the best defense is letting evidence speak." Vincent looked away, irritated by the conversation. "You keep talking like a lawyer. I work with records." Vincent pushed himself away from the counter. "Well, the test will settle it." Selena watched him walk toward the staircase. "Yes," she said quietly. "It will." Later that night, Selena sat alone at the dining table again. Her notebook lay open beside her laptop. She reviewed the notes she had written over the past several months. Questions about pregnancy timelines, late-night calls, Margaret's comments about memory confusion, financial transfers to a medical records consultant, a request for hospital documentation in Hartford. None of these things proved anything by themselves. But together, they formed a structure, a framework of actions that pointed toward one possibility. Someone in the Whitlock family had begun investigating birth records. Selena closed the laptop slowly. Upstairs, Vincent Whitlock believed the DNA test would confirm his suspicions about his wife. But Selena was beginning to understand something different. Vincent had not created this investigation. He had inherited it. From someone who cared about family reputation more than truth. From someone who had spent decades protecting a secret. Selena picked up her pen and wrote one final line in the notebook. Margaret Whitlock. Possible origin of investigation. The ink dried quickly. Selena closed the book and looked toward the staircase. 3 days remained until the DNA test. Vincent believed those results would determine the future of their marriage. Selena suspected the test would do something far more dangerous. It would begin unraveling a story the Whitlock family had buried long before Selena ever became part of it. And once certain records begin unraveling, they rarely stop. Thursday morning arrived gray and cold. The laboratory building stood between a pharmacy and a dental clinic on a quiet street in Stamford. It was a simple medical office, glass doors, neutral carpeting, and a waiting area furnished with chairs designed more for practicality than comfort. Selena arrived 5 minutes early. Her daughter slept in the stroller wrapped in a soft blanket against the winter air. Selena wore a dark wool coat and carried the same leather bag that held her notebook. Inside, the receptionist greeted her politely. "Mrs. Whitlock, yes, we're expecting you." The woman handed her a clipboard. "Please fill out the identification section and wait for the technician." Selena sat down and completed the paperwork carefully. The form requested basic details, name, date of birth, government identification numbers. Across the room, a television played a muted morning news broadcast. No one seemed to be watching. 10 minutes later, Vincent walked in. He looked as polished as always, navy suit overcoat draped neatly over one-arm hair combed with careful precision. But his eyes moved quickly across the room until they found Selena. For a brief moment, their gazes met. Neither spoke. Vincent approached the reception desk and signed his own documents. The receptionist gestured toward the waiting chairs. "You'll both be called in shortly." Vincent sat 2 chairs away from Selena. Not beside her, not across from her, just far enough that the distance between them felt deliberate. He glanced once at the stroller. The baby slept peacefully, unaware of the tension filling the small room. Vincent shifted in his seat. "You brought everything they asked for," he said quietly. "Yes, good." His voice carried a controlled tone, but Selena could hear something underneath it. Nervousness. Not about the baby, about the result. A technician opened the door and called their names, Mr. and Mrs. Whitlock. They followed her down a narrow hallway into a small testing room. The technician explained the procedure quickly. Each adult will provide a cheek swab sample. The infant sample will be collected the same way. She smiled gently at the baby. "It's painless." Selena nodded. "Son?" Vincent stood beside the counter with his arms folded. The technician swabbed Selena first, then Vincent. Finally, she collected a tiny sample from the baby's cheek, while Selena held her carefully. Within minutes, the process was complete. The technician sealed the samples inside labeled containers and placed them in a secure envelope. "Results will be available within 10 business days," she said. Vincent nodded. "Thank you." Selena simply gathered the baby's blanket and returned the stroller handle to its upright position. The entire appointment had taken less than 15 minutes. Outside, the cold air felt sharper. Vincent stood beside his car while Selena adjusted the baby's seat in the back of hers. "You're very composed about this," he said again. Selena closed the car door. "Should I not be?" Vincent hesitated. "I suppose you would be calm if you believe the result will clear you." Selena studied him for a moment. "I don't think this test is about clearing anyone." Vincent frowned. What else would it be about Selena placed the stroller in the trunk? That depends on what someone is looking for. Vincent did not answer. He watched her drive away. That afternoon, Selena met Lydia Harper at a small cafe near the courthouse. Lydia slid into the chair across from her with 2 cups of coffee. "How did it go, quick?" Vincent behaved yes. Lydia stirred sugar into her coffee. Did he look confident? Selena considered the question. "Controlled," she said. "That's not the same thing." Selena nodded. "No." Lydia leaned forward slightly. "I've been thinking about those Langley payments." "So have I. I asked someone at my firm about medical record consultants." Selena waited. They're usually hired when someone wants to verify or challenge old hospital documentation. "Birth records," Selena said quietly. "Exactly." Selena looked out the cafe window for a moment. Cars moved slowly along the street. People walked past the courthouse steps, carrying briefcases and folders. Normal life continued everywhere. Meanwhile, a quiet investigation had already begun inside the Whitlock family. "Vincent requested hospital records from Hartford," Selena said. Lydia raised an eyebrow. "That's where he was born, right?" "Yes." Lydia leaned back in her chair. "So he's been digging into his own birth records." Selena nodded. "And paying a consultant to review them." Lydia exhaled slowly. "That's interesting." Selena's voice remained calm. He didn't start doubting the baby first. He started doubting something else. Lydia looked at her carefully. "You think Vincent recently learned something about his own family?" "Yes." "And the accusation against you?" Selena folded her hands on the table. "Distraction." The words settled between them. Lydia stared at her for a moment. "That's a pretty cold strategy." Selena looked down at her coffee. "Fear makes people do strange things." Across town, Vincent Whitlock sat alone in his office at the investment firm. The blinds were partially closed. His computer screen displayed a spreadsheet he had not touched in 20 minutes. Instead, he stared at a printed document lying on the desk. It was a photocopy of a hospital record. Hartford Memorial Medical Center. Date of birth, Vincent Alexander Whitlock. The document looked official, but the date stamp in the corner appeared newer than the rest of the record. Vincent ran a hand through his hair. 2 months earlier, he had discovered something by accident. A missing file in Margaret's storage cabinet. a sealed envelope labeled simply 1978, personal. Inside had been a letter, not written to him, written to Margaret, from someone named Dr. Howard Langley. The letter referenced record adjustments and documentation alignment. Vincent had confronted Margaret that same evening. She denied everything. But 2 weeks later, she quietly admitted that some hospital paperwork from his birth had required correction. Vincent had not believed her explanation. That was when he hired Langley. That was when the investigation began. But the more Vincent searched, the more complicated the truth appeared. One possibility frightened him more than any other. What if the man who raised him had not been his biological father? What if Margaret had hidden that fact for decades? Vincent closed his eyes briefly. The Whitlock name meant something in this town. Inheritance, reputation, family standing. If that truth collapsed, everything connected to it could collapse as well. That was when another thought had entered his mind. If he could prove Selena had betrayed him, if the baby were not his, then the scandal would belong to her, not to the Whitlock family, not to Margaret, not to him. Vincent opened his eyes and stared at the hospital document again. The DNA test would arrive in 10 days. He believed it would answer one question. But somewhere deep in his mind, Vincent Whitlock feared it might answer another. And that second answer was the one he had been trying to avoid all along. 10 days can pass slowly when people are waiting for something that may change everything. For Selena Whitlock, those 10 days unfolded with the same quiet discipline she had practiced for years in the archives. She followed her routines. She fed the baby at regular hours. She took short walks through the neighborhood when the weather allowed. And every evening after the house grew quiet, she opened her notebook. She did not fill the pages with speculation. She recorded facts. Vincent's behavior, Margaret's phone calls, the continued absence of any apology from either of them. Across town, Vincent Whitlock counted the same 10 days very differently. Each morning, he checked his email before leaving for work. Each evening, he returned home with an expression that grew more tense as the week passed. Neither of them mentioned the test. The silence between them had become too structured for casual conversation. Margaret Whitlock, however, had not remained silent. She called Vincent nearly every night. Sometimes Selena could hear fragments of the conversations through the closed door of Vincent's study. Margaret's voice was always calm, controlled. But there was urgency beneath it. One evening, Selena heard Margaret say clearly through the speakerphone, "You must prepare yourself for any outcome." Vincent's reply came quickly. "There's only one outcome." Margaret paused before responding. "You cannot assume that." Selena did not hear the rest, but she wrote the words down. Margaret, prepare for any outcome. The notebook pages continued filling quietly. Meanwhile, Lydia Harper and Daniel Brooks had begun examining the financial records more closely. 3 days before the DNA results were scheduled to arrive, Lydia called Selena with new information. "I found something about Langley," Lydia said. Selena held the phone between her shoulder and ear while rocking the baby gently. "What kind of something, old court filings?" Selena waited. Lydia continued. 20 years ago, Langley testified in several civil cases involving disputed birth records. Selena's hand slowed slightly on the rocking chair. "What kind of disputes?" "Adoption documentation, identity corrections, paternity conflicts." Selena closed her eyes briefly. "Hospital records, exactly." Selena looked down at the baby sleeping in her arms. "And Vincent hired him." "Yes, recently." "Yes." Neither woman spoke for a moment. Finally, Lydia said quietly, "Selena, if Vincent is investigating birth records from his own family, then he already suspects something, yes?" Selena's voice remained calm. "And if that suspicion becomes public," Lydia exhaled slowly, "it could destroy the Whitlock family reputation." Selena said nothing. Lydia continued, "Which means accusing you might have served another purpose." Selena finished the thought. A distraction. The word hung between them again. 2 days later, the laboratory called. Selena was in the kitchen warming a bottle when the phone rang. The voice on the other end was polite. "Mrs. Whitlock, your DNA test results are ready." Selena did not rush to respond. "Thank you. You may collect the official report in person or request secure electronic delivery." Selena thought for a moment. "I'll collect it." "Very well. The office closes at 5. Vincent received the same call at his office less than an hour later. He stared at the message notification for several seconds before opening it. DNA test results ready. For weeks, he had been certain of what the report would say, but certainty had begun to erode in the quiet hours of the night. Too many questions about his own birth records remained unanswered. Too many conversations with Margaret had ended without clarity. Still, he told himself, one fact was simple. If the baby were not his, the rest of the investigation could wait. If the baby were not his, everything would shift. He left work early. The laboratory building looked the same as it had 10 days earlier. The same neutral waiting room. The same quiet receptionist. Selena was already there. She sat in the same chair she had used before the stroller positioned beside her. Vincent walked in slowly. Neither of them spoke. The receptionist glanced up. "Mr. and Mrs. Whitlock." "Yes," Vincent said. "The technician will bring the report." They waited in silence. A few minutes later, the technician entered, holding a sealed envelope. She handed it to Vincent. "Your certified results." Vincent took the envelope carefully. His hands felt colder than usual. Selena watched him without expression. "You may open it here if you wish," the technician said. Vincent nodded slowly. He broke the seal. Inside was a printed report with official stamps and signatures. For several seconds, he stared at the page without speaking. Then his eyes moved across the key line in the document. Probability of paternity 99.99%. Vincent Whitlock is confirmed as the biological father. The room remained silent. Selena did not move. Vincent read the line again. Then once more. The words did not change. The baby was his. The accusation he had made in the church hall had been wrong. Vincent lowered the paper slowly. For a moment, he looked as if someone had removed the ground beneath his feet. Selena spoke first. "Is it clear?" Vincent's voice came out quieter than expected. "Yes." The technician nodded politely. "Congratulations." But the word did not sound celebratory. It sounded procedural. Vincent folded the report and placed it back in the envelope. He did not look at Selena. Instead, he stared at the floor. Selena waited. Not because she expected an apology, because she wanted to see what he would do next. Finally, Vincent spoke. "We should leave." They stepped outside into the cold afternoon air. Cars passed slowly along the street. Life continued. Vincent stood beside the sidewalk holding the envelope. "You were telling the truth," he said. Selena did not answer immediately. "Yes," she said after a moment. Vincent looked up at her then. Something in his face had changed. It was not relief. It was fear. Because the result he had demanded had not solved the problem he was trying to escape. It had only removed the one distraction he had created. Selena noticed. "The test answered your question," she said quietly. Vincent swallowed. "Yes, but not the other one." Vincent stared at her. "What other one?" Selena studied his expression carefully. "The one that made you hire Dr. Langley." The color drained slightly from Vincent's face. For the first time since the church accusation, he looked completely unprepared. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said. Selena did not argue. She simply met his eyes. "You started investigating hospital records months ago," she said. Vincent said nothing. "You weren't trying to prove the baby wasn't yours." Vincent's hand tightened around the envelope. Selena finished the sentence calmly. "You were trying to prove something about yourself." A car passed between them and the streetlight. The moment stretched longer than either of them expected. Vincent finally looked away. For the first time since the accusation, Selena saw the truth clearly on his face. The DNA test had answered one question, but the real secret, the one buried decades earlier in hospital files and family history, was still waiting. And now that the baby's paternity was confirmed, there was nothing left to hide behind. After the laboratory confirmed Vincent Whitlock was the baby's biological father, something inside the Whitlock family shifted. But it did not move toward relief. It moved toward fear. Vincent drove home that afternoon without speaking to Selena again. The silence inside the car had been heavier than any argument. The DNA report rested inside the envelope on the passenger seat. A document meant to settle a question. Instead, it had opened another. When Vincent walked into the house that evening, Margaret Whitlock was already waiting in the living room. She had arrived without calling. She sat upright on the edge of the sofa, hands folded neatly in her lap, her posture as controlled as always. But Selena noticed something new the moment she stepped through the doorway behind Vincent. Margaret's composure was strained. Vincent closed the door quietly. "Well?" Margaret asked. Vincent removed the envelope slowly. The result came back. Margaret's eyes fixed on his face, and Vincent did not sit. He simply placed the envelope on the coffee table. "She's mine." Margaret blinked once. The words seemed to take a moment to register. "The baby, yes." Margaret leaned back slightly. For the first time in all the years Selena had known her, the older woman's expression showed something close to genuine uncertainty. "That complicates things," Margaret said softly. Selena stood near the doorway, holding the baby against her shoulder. "Complicates?" she repeated. Margaret looked at her calmly. "I meant emotionally." Selena did not reply. Vincent finally sat down in the armchair across from his mother. "You said it might not matter," he said. Margaret's voice remained careful. "I said you needed to prepare for different outcomes." Vincent leaned forward. "This wasn't the outcome I needed." Margaret looked toward Selena then. For a brief moment their eyes met. Selena saw something inside that gaze she had not noticed before. Not hostility, calculation. Margaret Whitlock was already thinking about how to repair the narrative. Margaret said gently, "Perhaps we should all sit down and talk." Selena did not move. "I don't think there's much left to discuss." Margaret clasped her hands together. "There is always something to discuss in a family." Selena looked at Vincent. "You accused me publicly of something that wasn't true." Vincent's jaw tightened. "I asked for clarity. You declared certainty." Margaret raised a hand slightly. "Let's not escalate this." Selena's voice remained calm. "I'm not escalating anything." Margaret exhaled slowly. "The situation has become complicated." Selena held her daughter a little closer. It was simple before Vincent made it public. Vincent looked away. Margaret watched the exchange carefully. Then she said something that changed the direction of the conversation. "Vincent," she said quietly, "have you told her?" The room grew still. Vincent's head lifted slowly. Told her what Margaret's tone remained neutral. About the records. Selena noticed the way Vincent's shoulders stiffened. "I told you," he said sharply. "We're not discussing that." Margaret studied him for a moment. "The DNA result changes things." "No," Vincent said. "It doesn't." Selena watched them both carefully. Two people speaking in half-finished sentences. Two people protecting a secret neither wanted to say out loud. Selena walked slowly toward the dining table and placed the baby's blanket down. When she turned back, her voice remained quiet. "The hospital records from Hartford," she said. Both Vincent and Margaret froze. Selena continued. "You requested them 2 months ago." Margaret's expression hardened slightly. "How do you know that Selena opened her notebook?" "I keep records." Vincent stood up suddenly. "You've been spying on me." Selena looked at him. "No, I've been paying attention." Margaret's voice cut through the tension. "Selena, this is not your concern." Selena met her gaze evenly. "It became my concern when your son accused me of infidelity in a church," Margaret did not respond. Selena continued calmly. "Dr. Howard Langley," she said. Margaret's hands tightened slightly. "You hired him to review medical documentation." Vincent stared at her. "How do you know that name?" Selena closed the notebook. "Financial records." Vincent looked toward Margaret. "You told her?" Margaret shook her head slowly. "No." The silence that followed carried a new weight. Selena spoke again. "You were investigating something about Vincent's birth." Margaret's voice turned cold. "That is private family history." Vincent's eyes moved between them. Selena held his gaze. "You thought if the baby wasn't yours, the scandal would belong to me." Vincent did not deny it. His silence confirmed everything. Margaret stood slowly. "This conversation is finished." Selena shook her head gently. "No." Margaret looked at her. "You have no right to pry into matters that occurred long before you married into this family." Selena's tone did not change. "Maybe not. But Vincent turned it into my problem." Vincent ran a hand through his hair. "This isn't about you." Selena looked at him carefully. "It became about me the moment you said those words in that church." Margaret stepped closer to Vincent. "You need to control the situation." Vincent looked exhausted. "I'm trying." Selena studied them both. A mother protecting a secret, a son terrified of what that secret might reveal, and a public accusation meant to bury the truth beneath someone else's shame. Selena picked up the baby's blanket again. "Oh, I'm not interested in destroying your family history," she said quietly. Margaret did not appear convinced. Selena continued, "But I am interested in protecting my own." Vincent's voice softened slightly. "What does that mean?" Selena looked at him calmly. "It means you don't get to accuse me publicly and then pretend none of this happened." Margaret crossed her arms. "What exactly do you want?" Selena did not hesitate. "The truth." Margaret laughed softly. "The truth is rarely simple." Selena nodded. "I know." She paused. "That's why records exist." Margaret's eyes narrowed slightly. Vincent suddenly looked very tired. "This is getting out of hand," he said. Selena turned toward the staircase. "I'm going upstairs." Margaret spoke again. "Selena." Selena stopped. Margaret's voice carried a quiet warning. "Some family histories are better left undisturbed." Selena did not turn around. "I work in archives," she said. "I know what happens when people try to erase records." She climbed the stairs slowly. Behind her, the Whitlock family sat in silence. Margaret stared at the closed notebook lying on the table. Vincent stared at the envelope containing the DNA report. And somewhere inside, with both of them, was the growing realization that Selena Whitlock had begun connecting pieces of a story that they had spent decades trying to keep hidden. The baby's paternity had been confirmed. But the deeper question, the one buried inside hospital records from 40 years earlier, had only just begun to surface. And once someone begins searching for the truth in written records, it becomes very difficult to stop them. The next morning, the Whitlock house felt unusually quiet. Margaret had left shortly after midnight the previous evening, her departure as controlled as her arrival. She had said very little before leaving, only that Vincent needed time to think carefully about how to proceed. Vincent had not slept much after that. Selena knew because she heard him moving through the house long after midnight. The sound of footsteps in the hallway, the faint creak of the study door opening and closing, the soft hum of his laptop downstairs. But Selena did not go looking for him. Instead, she slept beside the bassinet where her daughter rested peacefully. By morning, Vincent had already left for work. Selena found his coffee mug in the sink still half full. The DNA report envelope was gone from the table. But the tension he left behind lingered in the house. Selena moved through her morning routine, calmly feeding the baby, opening the curtains, reviewing emails from the university library about a document preservation project she had been managing before maternity leave. Normal life continued. But beneath the ordinary rhythm of the day, something had shifted. Vincent's accusation had failed. And now the Whitlock family's carefully maintained silence was beginning to crack. At noon, Selena met Daniel Brooks at his office again. This time, she brought copies of every financial document Lydia had collected. Daniel reviewed them slowly, his reading glasses resting low on his nose. 3 payments to Langley Medical Consulting, he said. Yes, all within 6 months. Yes. Daniel tapped the papers with his pen. The timing matters. Selena leaned forward slightly. How Daniel looked at her. Because your husband didn't start investigating hospital records 40 years after his birth without a reason. Selena nodded. That's what I thought. Daniel folded the papers. And once he began investigating his own birth records, he accused me. Daniel nodded. A diversion. Selena studied him carefully. You believe that too. Daniel sighed. I've practiced family law for 20 years. People create distractions when they're afraid of what they might discover. Selena looked toward the window overlooking the courthouse street. Vincent thought if he proved the baby wasn't his, the narrative would shift. Yes. Daniel leaned back in his chair. And the Whitlock family reputation would survive. Selena remained quiet. Daniel continued. The problem now is that his strategy collapsed. Yes, which means the original investigation that went into his birth records is still unresolved. Selena folded her hands. I think Margaret knows more than she's admitting. Daniel smiled faintly. I suspect that's true. He paused before continuing. Have you considered requesting access to those records yourself? Selena looked at him. Would that be legal? Daniel nodded. Birth records are public documents under certain conditions. Some older hospital records are archived. Selena thought for a moment. I work in archives. Daniel raised an eyebrow. That's convenient. Selena allowed herself a small smile. Yes. Daniel's tone turned more serious. But we need to be careful. If this situation moves into legal territory, defamation, custody disputes, financial settlements, documentation will matter. Selena nodded. That's why I've been keeping notes. Daniel looked at the notebook she placed on his desk. He flipped through several pages. Dates, conversations, observations, precise, methodical. Daniel closed the book. You've already done half the work most clients forget to do. Selena leaned back in her chair. I prefer written facts to memory. Daniel handed the notebook back. Good, because if Vincent's accusation caused reputational damage, these notes could matter later. Selena did not seem surprised. I assumed that. Meanwhile, across town, Vincent Whitlock sat in his office staring at a folder that had arrived by courier that morning. The return address read, Langley Medical Consulting. Vincent had been waiting for it. But now that it had arrived, he hesitated to open it. The courier envelope contained the additional records he had requested after the DNA test appointment. Records Langley had spent weeks attempting to locate. Hospital documentation from Hartford Memorial Medical Center. Records connected to Vincent's birth. Vincent finally opened the envelope. Inside were several photocopied pages, hospital intake forms, nursing notes, and a document that immediately made his hands go cold. A typed report titled, Birth Record Correction, Internal Documentation. Vincent read the first paragraph slowly. The report described an administrative correction made several days after his birth in 1978, a correction involving the name listed under biological father. Vincent's heart began beating faster. The original name had been crossed out. The corrected name typed beneath it. Robert Whitlock. Robert Whitlock had raised Vincent. Robert Whitlock had been the man Vincent believed was his father. But the correction date came 3 days after Vincent's birth. 3 days, long enough for someone to change a document. Vincent's phone rang. He looked at the screen. Margaret? He answered. You got the report, she said immediately. Yes, Margaret's voice sounded tense. You shouldn't have opened it yet. I needed to see it. A pause. Margaret spoke again. Vincent, records from that time were complicated. Vincent laughed softly. That's one way to describe it. Margaret's tone sharpened. Your father raised you. That's what matters. Vincent looked again at the crossed-out name on the document. You never told me this happened. It wasn't necessary. Vincent stood up from his desk. Was Robert Whitlock actually my father? Margaret did not answer. The silence on the phone was louder than any confession. Vincent closed his eyes. So that's why you paid Langley. Margaret finally spoke again. I was protecting this family. Vincent's voice lowered. You were protecting a lie. Across town, Selena Whitlock sat at her dining table, reviewing the copies Daniel Brooks had given her of public record procedures. Her laptop displayed a search portal connected to Connecticut state archival databases. She typed slowly. Hartford Memorial Medical Center, birth records 1978. Several entries appeared. Most were sealed, but a few administrative logs remained accessible. Selena opened one. Her eyes moved carefully across the document. There it was, a record entry dated 3 days after Vincent Whitlock's birth. Correction to paternal identification. Selena leaned back in her chair. The pieces of the story were beginning to align. Vincent had spent months investigating the truth about his own birth. Margaret had tried to bury it decades ago. And when Vincent realized the truth might surface, he had done the one thing he believed would protect the Whitlock name. He had accused someone else. Selena closed the laptop slowly. Upstairs, the baby stirred in her bassinet. Selena stood and walked toward the staircase. The truth about Vincent Whitlock's birth was no longer buried. It existed in records. And records once uncovered had a way of forcing every other lie into the light. 3 nights after Vincent received the documents from Langley Medical Consulting, the Whitlock house remained suspended in a fragile silence. Vincent had stopped bringing work home. He no longer spent long evenings in the study pretending to answer emails. Instead, he moved through the house slowly, as if each room had become unfamiliar. Selena noticed the change, but did not comment on it. She continued her quiet routines, feeding the baby, reviewing records, writing notes. The notebook had grown thick with dates and observations now, not accusations, just facts. Vincent watched her sometimes from the doorway when he thought she was not aware. But Selena always noticed that Thursday evening rain tapped softly against the kitchen windows. The baby slept upstairs, and the house felt smaller in the quiet. Vincent sat at the dining table with a glass of water he had not touched. Across the room, Selena organized a small stack of documents Lydia had delivered earlier that day. Vincent finally spoke. You've been looking into my family. Selena did not look up. I've been looking into the truth. Vincent exhaled slowly. That's not your responsibility. Selena placed one of the documents neatly back into the folder. It became my responsibility when you accused me publicly. Vincent rubbed his forehead. I didn't think it would go this far. Selena finally looked at him. You announced it in a church. Vincent had no answer for that. For several seconds, the only sound in the room was the steady rain outside. Then Vincent said something he'd been avoiding for weeks. My mother lied to me. Selena waited. Vincent stared at the table. The hospital record correction. Langley confirmed it. Selena had already seen the evidence herself. But she let Vincent continue. There was another name listed originally, he said quietly. A different father. Selena remained silent. Vincent's voice dropped further. My entire life, I believed Robert Whitlock was my biological father. He laughed once, but there was no humor in it. Turns out the hospital corrected that record 3 days after I was born. Selena spoke gently. Do you know who the original name belonged to? Vincent shook his head. No. The rain grew heavier against the windows. Vincent leaned back in the chair. For months, I thought there was some kind of mistake. Selena folded her hands calmly. That's why you hired Langley? Yes. Vincent looked at her. I thought if I could confirm the original record, I could confront my mother. Selena studied his face. And then Vincent hesitated. Then I realized what it might mean. Selena waited. If Robert Whitlock wasn't my father, Vincent said slowly, then everything built on that name becomes uncertain. Inheritance, family reputation, business connections. The Whitlock name had carried weight for decades in Fairfield County. Selena understood the implication. Vincent continued quietly. My mother built her entire life on the appearance of a perfect marriage. Selena asked the question Vincent had not yet spoken aloud. And if the truth came out, Vincent looked down. It would destroy her. Selena did not answer. Vincent's voice sharpened suddenly. You don't understand the kind of pressure that creates. Selena's tone remained calm. No, I understand something else. Vincent frowned. What you chose to protect your mother by accusing your wife. Vincent flinched slightly. I didn't know what else to do. Selena stood and walked to the sink. She poured a small glass of water. Vincent watched her. I thought if the baby wasn't mine, he said quietly, the scandal would shift somewhere else. Selena turned back toward him. You thought you could redirect the story. Vincent said nothing. The truth of it hung between them. Selena walked back to the table and placed the glass in front of him. You were afraid. Vincent nodded once. Yes, but fear doesn't excuse cruelty. Vincent closed his eyes. I know. Selena studied him carefully. For the first time since the accusation, Vincent Whitlock did not look like a man defending himself. He looked like someone exhausted by the consequences of his own choices. Upstairs, the baby made a soft sound through the monitor. Selena glanced toward the staircase. I'll check on her. Vincent remained at the table. While Selena disappeared upstairs, Vincent pulled a small device from his jacket pocket. It was his phone. He opened the recording application. A single audio file sat at the top of the list. The file had been recorded 2 nights earlier. Vincent had not planned to record the conversation. But when Margaret arrived unexpectedly that evening, something inside him had decided to preserve the moment. Vincent pressed play. Margaret's voice filled the quiet kitchen. Vincent, you must stop digging into this. You lied to me, Vincent's recorded voice answered. I protected you. You changed hospital records. They needed correction. The recording crackled slightly. Then Margaret's voice became sharper. You don't understand what that time was like. Robert insisted the family name remain intact. And the real father, Vincent asked in the recording. Margaret hesitated. That man was not part of our life. Vincent's recorded voice lowered. So you erased him. I preserved our family. The audio ended there. Vincent stared at the phone. The recording was legal. Connecticut law allowed recording conversations when one party consented. Vincent had been present, which meant the evidence was valid. Selena returned a few minutes later. The baby's asleep again. Vincent looked up. There's something you should hear. Selena paused. What is it? Vincent slid the phone across the table. Listen. Selena pressed play. Margaret's voice filled the room again. Every word, every hesitation, every admission. When the recording ended, Selena sat very still. Vincent spoke quietly. That's the truth my mother has been hiding. Selena placed the phone back on the table. You recorded her. Yes. Why? Vincent looked at her. Because I needed proof. Selena considered the device in front of her. Proof, records, documentation. The same tools she had relied on her entire life. But this evidence carried something more. Not just the possibility of truth, the possibility of consequence. Selena spoke slowly. This recording confirms Margaret altered hospital documentation. Vincent nodded. Yes, and that the Whitlock family hid the identity of your biological father. Yes. The room felt very still. Selena finally asked the question that mattered most now. What are you going to do with it? Vincent looked toward the staircase where the baby slept upstairs. I don't know. Selena leaned back in her chair. For months, Vincent had searched for answers about his own past. Now he had them. But the answers had come with a cost he had not anticipated. Because once secrets are recorded, once they exist in evidence, they stop belonging to the people who tried to hide them. They become part of the truth. And truth once documented rarely stays quiet. The recording changed everything. Not immediately and not loudly. There were no dramatic confrontations the following morning. No shouting arguments echoing through the Whitlock house. But the atmosphere shifted in a way that could not be undone. For the first time since Vincent's accusation in the church hall, the balance of control had quietly moved. Not through anger, through evidence. Selena understood that better than anyone. The next morning, she sat at the dining table, with the baby resting against her shoulder, reviewing the transcript she had typed from Vincent's recording. Her archival habits had taken over instinctively. She documented every line Margaret had spoken, every hesitation, every admission. When Vincent came downstairs, he paused into the doorway. "You wrote it all down," he said. Selena looked up briefly. "Yes." Vincent walked toward the table slowly. "You work fast." Selena turned the notebook so he could see. It's easier to analyze something once it's written. Vincent studied the page. Margaret's words appeared clearly in black ink. Robert insisted the family name remain intact. That man was not part of our life. I preserved our family. Vincent exhaled slowly. "I still don't know who my real father is." Selena closed the notebook. "The hospital records probably do." Vincent rubbed the back of his neck. "If my mother erased that name..." Selena finished the thought. "Then the correction document might still contain the original entry." Vincent looked at her. "You really think records like that survive?" Selena's voice remained calm. "Records rarely disappear completely." Vincent nodded slowly. That afternoon, Selena met Daniel Brooks again. She brought the audio recording and the transcript. Daniel listened carefully through a pair of headphones, while Selena sat across from his desk. When the recording ended, Daniel removed the headphones and leaned back in his chair. "Well," he said quietly, "that's significant." Selena folded her hands. "Legally," Daniel nodded. "Yes." He placed the headphones on the desk. "This recording confirms that hospital documentation related to Vincent's birth was altered intentionally." Selena watched his reaction. Would that matter now? Daniel thought for a moment. "It depends." "On what?" "On whether that alteration affected inheritance, legal identity, or financial transfers." Selena nodded slowly. "The Whitlock family has assets tied to the family name." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "I suspected that." He leaned forward. "And if Robert Whitlock wasn't Vincent's biological father, then some legal assumptions could be challenged." Selena finished. Daniel tapped the desk lightly. "Exactly." Selena remained quiet. Daniel studied her face carefully. "You're not interested in pursuing that angle, are you?" Selena shook her head. "No." Daniel looked surprised. Most people would. Selena's voice was calm. "I don't want the Whitlock estate." "Then what do you want?" Selena answered without hesitation. "Stability for my daughter." Daniel nodded. "That's reasonable." He paused. And Vincent's public accusation, Selena looked down at the notebook. "I want it corrected." Daniel understood immediately. "A formal statement." "Yes." Daniel leaned back again. "That's achievable." Across town, Margaret Whitlock was pacing slowly through her living room. The news of the recording had reached her earlier that morning. Vincent had told her himself. She had not expected that. Margaret Whitlock had spent decades managing appearances. Reputation had always been her greatest skill. But recordings were different. Recordings turned private conversations into evidence. Her phone rang. Margaret answered immediately. "Vincent." His voice was steady. "I met with Selena's lawyer this morning." Margaret's voice cooled. "So she's already building a case?" "No." Vincent hesitated. "She isn't trying to destroy the family." Margaret stopped pacing. "Then what does she want?" Vincent spoke quietly. "A public correction." Margaret closed her eyes briefly. "That's impossible. It might not be." Margaret's voice hardened. "You embarrassed her once already." "You expect me to embarrass our entire family publicly?" Vincent remained silent. Margaret continued. The Whitlock name cannot survive another scandal. Vincent finally answered. The scandal already happened. Margaret said nothing. Vincent's voice lowered. You heard the recording too? Yes, and you know it proves what happened. Margaret exhaled slowly. Vincent families survive by protecting their stories. Vincent's reply came quietly. And sometimes they survive by telling the truth. Margaret ended the call without responding. That evening, Selena returned home from Daniel Brooks's office with a small folder of legal notes. Vincent was sitting on the porch steps when she arrived. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the yard. Selena paused beside him. You've been here a while? Yes. Vincent looked out at the street. Daniel Brooks called me. Selena nodded. He said you're not trying to ruin my family? I'm not. Vincent glanced at her. Why, Selena answered simply, because revenge doesn't help my daughter. Vincent looked down at his hands. I owe you an apology. Selena waited. For the church, he continued. For the accusation. Selena watched him carefully. You owe more than an apology. Vincent nodded. I know. He looked up at her. Daniel says a public correction would settle things. Yes. Vincent looked toward the house where Margaret's influence had shaped his entire life. My mother will fight that. Selena's voice remained gentle. She might. Vincent exhaled slowly. But the recording changes everything. Selena said nothing. Vincent looked at her again. I never meant for you to carry the weight of my family's secret. Selena's expression did not soften. But you did. Vincent accepted the truth of that. Yes. The quiet street remained still around them. A neighbor walked a dog past the mailbox. Somewhere down the block, a car door closed. Normal life continued untouched by the unraveling story inside the Whitlock family. Vincent finally spoke again. If we correct the record publicly? Selena finished the thought. The truth replaces the lie. Vincent nodded slowly. And the rest, Selena looked toward the house. The rest belongs to your family history. Vincent sat silently for a moment. For the first time in months, he understood something clearly. The recording had exposed his mother's secret. The DNA test had exposed his accusation. But Selena Whitlock had never tried to use either of those truths as weapons. She had simply placed them where everyone could see them. And sometimes, that was more powerful than any retaliation. The hearing was scheduled on a quiet Tuesday morning. It was not a dramatic trial, not the kind that filled courtrooms with spectators or reporters. Family court rarely worked that way. Most cases passed through the system, quietly resolved through documentation, testimony, and legal procedure rather than spectacle. But for the Whitlock family, the hearing carried weight. Because this time, the story Vincent Whitlock had tried to control would be examined through records rather than accusations. Selena arrived early. The courthouse in Fairfield County stood in a modest brick building surrounded by winter trees and narrow sidewalks. Inside the hallway outside the family courtroom smelled faintly of paper and coffee. Daniel Brooks walked beside her carrying a thin file folder. You don't need to say much today, he told her. Selena nodded. I understand. Daniel adjusted his glasses. The evidence will do most of the speaking. Selena appreciated that. Across the hallway, Vincent Whitlock stood near a window. He wore the same careful professionalism he had carried into countless financial meetings, dark suit-polished shoes, controlled posture. But something about him looked smaller now. The confidence that had once filled every room he entered had been replaced by quiet exhaustion. Margaret Whitlock stood beside him. Her expression remained composed, as it always did in public settings. Anyone who did not know the circumstances might have assumed she was attending an ordinary legal appointment. Selena noticed the subtle tension in Margaret's shoulders. Margaret Whitlock had spent decades protecting her family's image. Now that image sat inside a legal file across the hallway. Daniel glanced toward Vincent and Margaret. Are you ready? Selena looked down at her daughter sleeping peacefully in the carrier beside her chair. Yes. The courtroom opened 10 minutes later. Inside, the space felt smaller than many people imagined courtrooms to be. A raised bench for the judge, 2 tables for attorneys, several rows of seating behind them. The judge entered quickly and reviewed the case summary. Whitlock family matters, she said. Her tone suggested familiarity with disputes that involved both personal conflict and legal documentation. Daniel Brooks stood first. Your Honor, this hearing concerns a public accusation of non-paternity made by Mr. Vincent Whitlock and the subsequent confirmation of paternity through certified DNA testing. The judge nodded. I've reviewed the report. Vincent's attorney, retained only days earlier after Daniel notified Vincent of the formal hearing, stood next. My client acknowledges the DNA findings. The judge glanced down at the document in front of her. Mr. Whitlock, the report indicates a 99.99% probability that you are the biological father. Yes, Your Honor. The judge looked up, which contradicts the public statement you made regarding your wife. Vincent swallowed. Yes. The courtroom remained quiet. Daniel spoke again. Your Honor, the purpose of this hearing is not punitive. My client is requesting formal correction of the record and acknowledgement that the accusation made against her was unfounded. The judge nodded slowly. That seems reasonable. Margaret Whitlock shifted slightly in her seat. Her attorney, hired only that morning, leaned toward her and whispered something Selena could not hear. The judge continued reviewing the documents. In addition, Daniel said there's evidence suggesting the accusation may have been connected to unrelated investigations within the Whitlock family regarding historical medical records. Vincent's attorney stood quickly. Your Honor, those matters are private family history and not directly relevant to this case. Daniel did not argue. We are not seeking to litigate that history here, he said calmly. However, the context explains why the accusation occurred. The judge considered this for a moment. I'm not interested in family gossip, she said. Only in the facts that affect this case. Daniel nodded. The relevant facts are simple. He placed the DNA report on the table. Mr. Whitlock publicly declared that the child was not his. He gestured towards Selena. My client endured reputational damage as a result. He then placed another document beside the DNA report. The DNA test proves the accusation was false. The judge studied the pages. Vincent's attorney did not object, because there was nothing to object to. Facts rarely leave room for argument. The judge finally looked up. Mr. Whitlock. Vincent stood. Yes, Your Honor. Do you dispute the findings of this DNA report? No. Do you acknowledge that your previous statement about the child's paternity was incorrect? Vincent hesitated only a moment. Yes. The judge's voice remained neutral. Then I expect a formal written correction to be issued, acknowledging that fact. Vincent nodded. Yes, Your Honor. Margaret Whitlock closed her eyes briefly. The Whitlock name had been protected for decades through silence. Now the truth would appear in a document no one could erase. The judge turned toward Selena. Mrs. Whitlock, do you wish to make a statement? Daniel glanced at her quietly. Selena stood. She did not look at Vincent or Margaret. She spoke directly to the judge. I only want the record to reflect the truth. The judge nodded. That will happen. Selena continued. My daughter deserves a life without false accusations attached to her name. The judge's expression softened slightly. That is understandable. Selena sat down again. No anger, no dramatic speech, just a quiet correction. The judge finalized the hearing quickly. The court recognizes the DNA report as definitive evidence of paternity. She looked toward Vincent. You will provide a formal written statement correcting the accusation. Vincent nodded again. Yes, Your Honor. And this matter will be considered resolved unless additional disputes arise. The gavel struck lightly. The hearing ended. Outside the courtroom, the hallway filled with the soft sound of people leaving. Margaret Whitlock walked past Selena without speaking. But Selena noticed the way Margaret's eyes moved briefly toward the baby carrier, not with warmth, with recognition. Margaret Whitlock now understood something she had not expected. Selena Whitlock had never tried to humiliate the family. She had simply refused to carry their lie. Vincent remained near the courtroom door as Selena and Daniel stepped into the hallway. For a moment, Vincent looked as if he wanted to say something. Finally, he spoke. "It's done." Selena nodded. "Yes." Vincent looked down at his hands. "I'll send the statement today." Selena said nothing. Vincent glanced toward the courthouse window. "I thought this would destroy everything." Selena adjusted the baby's blanket. It didn't. Vincent looked at her. "Why didn't you push further?" Selena answered quietly. "Because justice doesn't require humiliation." Vincent had no reply to that. For the first time since the accusation in the church hall, the truth now existed where it belonged. Not whispered in private, not hidden in family history, but written into the official record. And sometimes that quiet kind of truth carried more weight than any public victory. The official statement appeared 2 days later. Vincent Whitlock released it through a short written notice sent to the church board, several close family members, and the handful of people who had been present at the christening reception. It was not dramatic, not emotional, and not particularly long. But it was clear. The DNA test confirmed that he was the biological father of the child. His previous public statement had been incorrect. Selena Whitlock had done nothing to justify the accusation. There were no excuses written in the document. No explanation about fear, family pressure, or confusion. Just the correction. Selena read the statement quietly at the kitchen table while her daughter slept nearby. When she finished, she folded the paper and placed it inside her notebook. Not because she needed a reminder, because records mattered. Upstairs, the Whitlock house felt unusually empty. Margaret had not visited since the hearing. Vincent moved through the rooms with a quieter presence than before, as if the house no longer belonged to the version of his life he had built. The silence between him and Selena had changed as well. It was no longer tense. It was final. 3 days after the hearing, Vincent knocked gently on the bedroom door where Selena was packing a small suitcase. She looked up. "Yes." Vincent stood in the doorway. "You're leaving?" Selena nodded. "For a while." Vincent looked at the half-packed bag on the bed. "You didn't say anything." Selena folded one of the baby's blankets carefully. There wasn't much left to say. Vincent stepped inside the room slowly. "Where will you go?" "My sister's place in New Haven." Vincent nodded. "That makes sense." For a moment, he simply watched her pack. Selena moved methodically, placing each item in the suitcase with the same careful organization she used when storing archival documents. Nothing rushed, nothing careless. Vincent spoke again. "You don't hate me." It was not a question. Selena paused before answering. "Hate takes energy." Vincent looked down. "I deserve it." Selena zipped the suitcase halfway. "You made a choice." Vincent leaned against the doorframe. "I thought I was protecting my family." Selena met his eyes calmly. "You were protecting a story." Vincent did not argue. Selena continued packing. The baby stirred softly in the bassinet beside the bed. Vincent looked at the child. "I didn't even hold her properly when she was born," he said quietly. Selena said nothing. Vincent's voice softened further. "I was too busy trying to figure out who I was." Selena closed the suitcase and set it on the floor. "That's not something you solve by accusing someone else." Vincent nodded slowly. "I know." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Outside the window, the maple tree branches moved in the wind. Autumn had begun to touch the leaves with faint color. Vincent finally said what had been lingering between them. "I found the original record." Selena looked at him. "The hospital archive?" "Yes." Vincent hesitated. Langley located the uncorrected file. Selena waited. Vincent continued. My biological father wasn't Robert Whitlock. Selena had expected that. Do you know who it was? Vincent nodded once, a man named Daniel Mercer. The name meant nothing to Selena. He worked briefly at the hospital in the late 70s. Vincent's voice carried no anger now, just quiet acceptance. My mother had an affair. Selena did not react. Vincent continued. When Robert found out she was pregnant, he forced the correction. Selena folded the baby's clothes slowly, and the record was changed. Yes, Vincent looked out the window. For 40 years, I believed a story that wasn't real. Selena spoke gently. That happens in families. Vincent looked back at her. But I destroyed my marriage trying to avoid it. Selena did not contradict him, because it was true. Vincent stepped closer to the bassinet. The baby slept peacefully, unaware of the complicated history surrounding her family name. She deserves better than what I did, he said. Selena nodded. Yes. Vincent looked at Selena again. You're leaving with dignity. Selena lifted the suitcase from the floor. That was always the plan. Vincent allowed himself a small, tired smile. You never tried to humiliate me. Selena walked toward the door. That wouldn't fix anything. Vincent followed her down the hallway. The house echoed softly with their footsteps. At the bottom of the stairs, Selena placed the suitcase beside the front door. Vincent stood a few feet away. I'll handle the rest of the paperwork, he said. Selena nodded. Thank you. Vincent hesitated. Selena. She turned. I'm sorry. The apology sounded genuine, but Selena did not linger on it, because apologies arrived after actions had already shaped the future. I know, she said. She lifted the baby carrier gently and stepped onto the front porch. The late afternoon air felt cool. Vincent remained inside the doorway, watching her. Not trying to stop her, just witnessing the moment. Selena placed the suitcase in the back of the car. Then she looked once at the house. The Whitlock home had been part of her life for 7 years. It had also been the place where a family secret nearly destroyed her reputation. Now it was simply a building. Vincent stepped onto the porch. Will I see her? He asked quietly. Selena considered the question. Yes. Vincent nodded. That's more than I deserve. Selena placed the baby carrier carefully into the back seat. Then she turned the key in the ignition. The car rolled slowly down Hawthorne Lane. Vincent remained on the porch watching until the vehicle disappeared around the corner. For the first time in his life, Vincent Whitlock understood something his mother had never allowed him to learn. A family name could be protected by lies for years. But dignity could not be built on those lies. And Selena Whitlock had chosen dignity instead of revenge. That choice would remain long after the Whitlock story finished unraveling. The apartment in New Haven was smaller than Selena Whitlock's house in Fairfield. But it felt quieter in a way that had nothing to do with space. Selena's sister Rachel Whitlock lived on the second floor of a narrow brick building a few blocks from the harbor. The place had high windows, pale wooden floors, and the steady, distant sound of boats moving across the water. When Selena arrived that first evening, Rachel opened the door before Selena even reached the top of the stairs. You look tired, Rachel said softly. Selena smiled faintly. I feel calm. Rachel took the suitcase from her hand. Come inside. The baby stirred in the carrier as Selena stepped into the apartment. The living room smelled faintly of tea and lemon cleaner. Rachel had prepared the spare bedroom with a small crib near the window. Selena placed the baby gently inside. For a long moment, she simply watched her daughter sleep. Rachel stood quietly beside her. You don't have to explain everything tonight, Rachel said. Selena nodded. I know. Rachel placed a hand on her shoulder. But I'm glad you're here. Selena looked around the room. For the first time in weeks, the silence did not feel tense. It felt safe. The days that followed settled into a new rhythm. Selena walked along the harbor path with the baby most mornings. She answered emails from the university library about returning to work after maternity leave. Rachel worked long hours at the hospital nearby, but the apartment always felt warm when she came home in the evenings. Meanwhile, the Whitlock story continued to fade quietly behind them. Vincent kept his word. The official correction circulated through the church community and the social circles that had heard the original accusation. People spoke about it for a few weeks, some with sympathy, others with embarrassment for having believed the worst so quickly. Eventually, the conversations stopped. Public scandals rarely last long once the truth becomes ordinary. Vincent also finalized the legal arrangements Daniel Brooks had helped draft. Custody terms, financial support, clear documentation acknowledging Selena as the child's primary caregiver. All of it arrived through email and formal paperwork rather than emotional conversation. Selena reviewed each document carefully. Then she signed. Not because the process brought satisfaction, because it provided stability. One afternoon in early autumn, Selena sat by the apartment window while her daughter slept in the crib. The harbor water reflected pale sunlight through the glass. Her notebook rested open on the table. The same notebook she had carried through every moment of the past several months. Inside it were the facts that had shaped everything. The first uneasy questions during pregnancy, the payments to Langley Medical Consulting, the DNA test appointment, Margaret's recorded admission, the court hearing, and Vincent's written correction. Selena read through the pages slowly. Then she closed the notebook, not because the story had ended, because the documentation was complete. Across town in Fairfield, Vincent Whitlock stood inside his mother's living room. Margaret Whitlock had not spoken much since the hearing. The house looked exactly as it always had. Immaculate furniture, polished floors, framed photographs of family history carefully arranged along the walls. But the atmosphere had changed. Vincent held the folder containing the hospital records Langley had recovered. Margaret watched him from the armchair. "You came to show me those again?" she asked quietly. Vincent shook his head. "No." He placed the folder on the coffee table. "I came to tell you something." Margaret remained silent. Vincent continued. "I met Daniel Mercer last week." Margaret's eyes widened slightly. "You what?" "He lives in Vermont now." Margaret's voice sharpened. "You had no right to contact him." Vincent's expression remained calm. "I had every right." Margaret looked away. Vincent spoke slowly. "He didn't know about me." Margaret's shoulders stiffened. "You're certain?" "Yes." Vincent looked down at the folder. He was surprised. Margaret said nothing. Vincent continued. "He's not interested in claiming anything." Margaret exhaled slowly. "That's good." Vincent looked at her carefully. "But he wanted me to know the truth." Margaret's voice softened slightly. "The truth is complicated." Vincent shook his head. "No, it was hidden." Margaret closed her eyes. Vincent picked up the folder again. "I'm not changing my name." Margaret looked up. The Whitlock name raised me. "I won't erase it." Relief flickered briefly across her face. But Vincent continued. "I'm not protecting the lie anymore, either." Margaret said nothing. Vincent walked toward the door. "I told Selena the truth." Margaret's voice carried a trace of disbelief. "She deserved that much." Vincent paused before leaving. "For the first time in my life, I'm not afraid of the story anymore." Margaret watched him go. And for the first time in decades, the carefully protected Whitlock narrative had been replaced with something simpler, the truth. Late that evening in New Haven, Selena stepped quietly onto the apartment balcony while Rachel washed dishes inside. The harbor lights reflected across the dark water. Selena held her daughter against her shoulder. The baby's breathing was soft and steady. For months, Selena had lived inside a story shaped by accusation, secrecy, and family history that had nothing to do with her. Now that story had ended. Not with revenge, not with humiliation, but with distance. Selena whispered softly to the sleeping child, "Your life begins with the truth." The wind moved gently across the harbor. Inside the apartment, Rachel turned off the kitchen lights. Selena stood there for a moment longer. Then she stepped back inside and closed the balcony door. The Whitlock family's secret had been exposed, but Selena Whitlock had chosen not to carry it with her. She carried only what mattered, her dignity, and the quiet future waiting for her daughter. The story of Selena Whitlock does not end with a dramatic victory. There was no courtroom applause, no moment of revenge, no public humiliation returned in equal measure. Instead, there was something quieter, a correction, a record set straight. Sometimes the most powerful form of justice is not punishing someone who wronged you. It is refusing to become the kind of person they expected you to be. Vincent Whitlock believed an accusation could protect his family's story. He believed that if suspicion fell on someone else, the truth about his own past might remain buried. But truth rarely works that way. Records remain, evidence surfaces, and eventually the quiet facts speak louder than any accusation. Selena Whitlock never shouted in the church hall. She never chased revenge after the DNA results came back. She simply waited. She documented. She let the truth appear where everyone could see it. And when it did, she walked away with the one thing no scandal could take from her: her dignity. If this story made you pause for a moment, consider sharing where you're listening from in the comments. Stories travel farther than we realize, and it's always powerful to see how many places the same truth can reach. And if you appreciate stories about quiet strength, truth, and justice that unfold slowly, consider subscribing so you won't miss the next one. Sometimes the loudest victories are not victories at all. Sometimes they are simply the moment someone chooses to leave with their head held high.